If you haven't already, and if you could just add your name, role, district in the chat, that would be great for us to keep track of. And we're going to start right with what primary project is. So primary project is a tier 2 intervention developed by Children's Institute over 65 years ago. So it's the longest standing evidence-based tier 2 program that we're aware of nationally and of course across New York State. The goal of this program is to really help students in pre-K through third grade adjust and connect to the school setting. So it's always what I say, it's for those kids that find school an unpleasant experience for whatever reason. So, there's just this favorite quote that we include up here too, that no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. And for primary project, relationships are important. So it's the ability for a child to connect with a caring adult during their school day. And we're going to talk more about this and what it looks like. Next slide. So what do we mean by tier 2? So I'm sure for those of you that are on this call, you're familiar with the pyramid that helps to kind of triage and identify what we think about when we think about multi-tiered systems of support, right? So we have a universal tier that all students receive that's typically research-based, evidence-based. And then we have some students that we're noticing that tier 1 services and supports are not really working for. So it's that group of tier 2 students that is best for primary project. It's what I call those bubblers, right? It's those kids that are just bubbling out of tier 1, reaching tier 2. And it's those kids that we think about that if they don't get something, could potentially fall through the cracks. So primary project was developed to support these students with mild to moderate school adjustment concerns. The focus here is mild to moderate. It's not for those kids that are really at a tier 3 level, but it's what we think about as your total population. It's that 10 to 15% of students that may be appropriate for this kind of intervention. Next slide. So as we think about primary project, there's 6 foundational components to this program. So this is kind of your landing pad here. So this is what we think about as we think about implementation of this program. Our focus is first on young children. So it's that pre-K through third grade. As a district, you may all approach this very differently. So in Weedsport, you may be thinking about K through 2. In New York City, you might be thinking about pre-K and K. So you decide what grades you want to focus in on. You do not have to do all the grades. And part of that decision could certainly be impacted by what other tiered supports do you have, and how do you kind of manage all of these supports within that tiered system. The next core component is screening and selection. So we think about this in a very systematic approach. So whatever grade levels you decide on as a district, you will screen all students in those grade levels and use that data to help inform the candidates of who is selected for primary project. So we're going to talk a little bit more about screening in another slide, because this is the important piece of primary project. Because what I say is, if we miss this part and we get this part wrong, then the rest of the core components tend to not work. So we have to stay really grounded in what we know works for this intervention in this program. The next core component is direct student support. So this is really the heart and soul of primary project. So in your districts, you will work to identify the person who will be called a child associate or is often a highly trained paraprofessional or a teacher's aide. So whatever your district would hire that person in as and whatever job title you would give it. But that person is really the one who is going to work with students on a one-to-one basis in a play setting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that setting and what's included in it coming up. The other piece that's really critical is all of you have school-based mental health professionals, whether it's a social worker, a school psychologist, or a school counselor. Any one of those could provide the weekly supervision, oversee the day-to-day activities, and provide the clinical and program oversight for primary project. This is a key piece because as we think about that third core component, it's paraprofessionals who are essentially an extension of the school-based mental health professional. So school-based mental health professionals have to be engaged and they have to be part of this program to provide that clinical oversight. The fifth core component is ongoing program evaluation. So as a grant recipient, you will use Comet, which is a web-based application that houses the suite of measures, including a screening tool. So if your district is not already using a systematic screening instrument or measure, we have one that's been specifically developed for primary project. So there is an evaluation component through Comet, which is the web-based tool that has several measures that are part of your overall evaluation package and how you understand how this program is making an impact for students. And then the last core component is integration into the school community. So really thinking about how this program fits within a tiered support for students and that it's not a standalone program. So it's woven within what's already happening at your school and in your district, that it becomes part of the support services that are offered for students. So before I kind of go to key roles, I want to just take a pause and a breath to just check in with those that are on the call to see if there's any questions at this point. Dr. Brown, thank you for joining. I just looked and saw that you're here, so thank you.
Welcome, thank you.
All right, so let's move on. So in districts and in schools, there are some key roles, and I want to talk about this because these, it's important to understand who has responsibility for what. So many of you are in an administrative capacity or here in an administrative capacity. So certainly at the district level, within a school building, we have a principal who understands what project is, how it operates, what kinds of students are best for this program. And the principal certainly provides support around systematic screening, right? So we think about this as this is what we do for all students to understand where they're at socially and emotionally. A principal also helps provide space for the playroom and thinking about where the playroom is going to be located and that there is dedicated space for the program for the associate to see students. This next role as a project coordinator may or may not happen in districts. So for example, a project coordinator is really in a district and is the person who really manages a program across multiple buildings. So they may be the interface with the Comet team around getting your web-based application up and running. They may help with training around Comet and completing instruments. They might help coordinate training and registrations for training. They might help with the budget materials and making sure that all of the pieces for this grant are included and intact. So the project coordinator plays a very specific role, and in some districts is not always a required role. So I just want to put that out there so that for a smaller district or just for a school, many programs can operate with the child associate, mental health professional, and the principal, as well as your district level staff, like your business contact or assistant superintendent, etc. The mental health professional is a key role. So that is somebody who has to be identified as who is going to take kind of the responsibility for that day-to-day management of primary project and really be a champion for it in a school building. And then of course your child associate, who's really that direct interventionist and the heart and soul of primary project. And we can talk a little bit more about the qualities of this person and what makes that position so special. So I said that we would talk a little bit more about screening, and here it is. So why do we screen? And maybe in some of your districts, you're already using, there's lots of instruments that are out there when it comes to thinking about screening students for social emotional learning. So we have an instrument called the Teacher Child Rating Scale that's been developed specifically for primary project and for use in schools to look at students in 4 key areas. This data can be used to help identify students not only for primary project, but can be used by your school-based mental health professional to identify students that may be appropriate or could benefit from other interventions as well. So we have the Teacher Child Rating Scale. If you are a district that's using another evidence-based or standardized SEL screening measure, that certainly can be used. We just want to know what you're using. If you are using another screening measure, by requirements of this NYSED grant, as a grantee from our monies, you have to use the TCRS as your pre-post outcome measure. So you have to use that measure still just to measure change only on students who are receiving primary project. So I had mentioned that the TCRS looks at 4 key areas. So it's completed by the teacher. It's typically done after about 4 to 6 weeks after the start of the school year. So by early October, most schools are typically screening all students in the grade levels that they plan to serve. This is a teacher completed measure, and it looks at 4 areas, and you see the areas on your screen. So it's behavior control, it's the ability, how well kids are able to control their impulses and their emotions. Peer social skills, so how well they're able to make and maintain friendships. Assertive social, so it picks up those internalizing behaviors or those behaviors of shy, withdrawn students. And then task orientation. So how well is a student able to focus, but also to take initiative for tasks in the classroom? If you are a school that is screening, so say you decide to serve K through 3, our recommendation with screening is always to think about how many students would you ideally be screening in the fall? And then how many, what grade levels would you screen mid-year? So typically, again, in January, schools are screening a different cohort of grade levels. So for example, in a district near us, they see K through 2 students across the district. In the fall, they're screening first and second graders and in January, they're screening kindergarten students. The reason being is they have a half-time child associate in each of their buildings, and they're using data that's timed with when they can actually identify and get parent permission and see students, and then again in January so that they're not using old data. Typically in a year, 2 cycles of primary project can be delivered, which makes this a really efficient and effective program. So students can be seen once a week for 30 to 40 minutes over the course of 12 to 15 weeks. So again, 2 cycles in a year, and usually they're seeing 2 different cohorts of students. So as we think about what kids get into this program, so certainly we use that TCRS data to help inform, but that's not the only piece of data. So the primary project team, usually the mental health professional and child associate, are sitting with teachers and having some conversations around what is the student like during their school day. And I always say to teams, a question that teachers can really get their head around is, who at the end of the day do you just wish you had 5 extra minutes for? What are those kids that you just wish you had the opportunity to connect with them a little bit more, but because of the classroom demands, you just don't have that ability to do that? Child associates most likely have been in the classrooms, maybe hanging out in classrooms, seeing what kids kind of fit. So there's some observational data that can be used to help drive what students we identify and select for this intervention. You have your hard data from your TCRS or your other systematic screener, and then you have conversations with teachers. Certainly building principals could have input, parents could have input. So if a parent knew about primary project and said, you know what, we just came to this district and he or she is really having a hard time transitioning and connecting to their school day. So what supports could be put in place for him or her? So certainly a parent could advocate on behalf of their child as well. Next slide. So in thinking about primary project, what it is our goal of this program is really to help kids with school adjustment. At the end of this intervention, it's really to have kids feel happy about their school experiences. It's designed for students with mild to moderate or emerging difficulties. It's not for kids who are floating to a tier 3 level. It provides that caring connection or an adult for a student. And it's an early intervention prevention program. So when we think about prevention, we're catching things early before it becomes a bigger problem. What it's not is it's not necessarily focused on adjustment outside of school. So while lots of things happen when students leave the school building at 2:40 or 3 o'clock or whenever your school day ends, we can only control for what we can control for, and we can help make school a pleasant experience while kids are there. It's not for students with severe difficulties. So those kids that are being determined for tier 3 services, either with counseling through your school-based mental health professional or outside community mental health, it's not for those kids. While we use a therapeutic model using a child-centered therapy approach, we're careful not to call it therapy because of the wide range in which child associates bring life experience and just their selves to this position. And it's certainly not a treatment program. So I think this wraps up my piece. Before I turn it over to Lindsay, let me just take a pause and look at all your faces, the ones that I can see, to see if people are like, had enough information already, or if you're still with me. Any questions at this point? before we talk about the application for funds and what this funding means? All right, Lindsay, you look clear for takeoff.
All right, thanks, Lynn. And we can always pause for questions at the end as well. We can stay on as long as you all need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the application for funds process. Just so you all know, my name is Lindsay Dryden. I am the primary project coordinator, and one of my roles is to coordinate the application for funds process. So just so that you're aware of where our programs are here in New York State. So this year we have a total of 99 programs across the state. Many of the programs have been in existence for many decades, and some are brand new. You can see we have a large concentration here in the Finger Lakes and Western New York region, and we are looking to grow a little bit more in different areas of the state as well. So the way this works is that CI, or Children's Institute, receives funds from the New York State Education Department to distribute to school districts, other public or private elementary schools, charter schools, public agencies, and nonprofits. So I don't think there's anybody on the call that's in that boat. So I'm going to go ahead and just focus on the school district version of this. And really what the money does is it supports the costs associated with beginning a primary project program for up to 3 years. So the goal is to get you up and running so that after that 3-year period, you can sustain the program long-term and really integrate it into your tiered systems of support. Here is some of the eligibility. So one of the most important things that every district that qualifies for primary project is to have space to host a primary project playroom. We know that space is a premium in schools, so we completely understand that you might not have a large space or a classroom for that. And we can definitely work with you to be creative, but the principal really has a role in identifying that space when you're thinking about where you could have a primary project playroom. Some people do it in a closet, some people do it in a shared space with OT or PT, but we just want to make sure that if it is a shared space, that when it's primary project time, the only people in there are the child and the child associate to really provide that confidentiality. Another part of the eligibility is just the willingness to use SEL screening measures, whether it's the primary project suite of measures or screening students in a way that your district already does. You must have an on-site mental health professional to supervise the program. The ability to hire a high-quality child associate. So this can be somebody that's already in your building. A lot of districts do that. They've already identified the person. They have the person in mind. And some people hire their child associate from outside of the district and bring them on to the team. We ask that people have a commitment from stakeholders to implement the program with fidelity. So we're thinking about your school superintendent, your school principal, the mental health staff, the teachers. So really creating that buy-in early on and having a plan for that buy-in. And then commitment to long-term sustainability throughout the funding period. So it is a 3-year grant, and here is how it works. So in year 1, you can apply for up to $15,000 for one school. Some districts use in their budgets all of the $15,000 to hire their child associates and other costs associated with primary project, and some need less than that depending on the size of their school. For year 2, that whatever your original award amount was, you receive 75% of that original award, and year 3, you receive 50% of that original award. And then again, the goal is that eventually the program is sustained by your school district or school, and it is your responsibility to continue with all of the measures and the costs of having a child associate on board after that time. Districts, if you are a school district that is applying that has more than one school, you can apply for up to 2 schools And that would be for $30,000. So it's basically the same idea as One School, but just you can apply for up to $30,000. It's double the amount. That was a lot. I'm actually going to pause there for just a second. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So here are the commitments. So we, during the process, ask that everybody commits to being trained by Children's Institute. So Lynn and Shelley are master trainers. They are excellent at what they do. They've been working in with Primary Project for many, many years. And we start off our training cycle in late September, early October every year, where we train principals, mental health supervisors, project coordinators, and child associates in our basics training. And then we have an additional training for just mental health supervisors in November. So we do ask that everybody participate in that training in their first year. And then if there's any new staff members in subsequent years, we ask that those people are also trained in years 2 and 3. We provide other training throughout the year. So child associates and mental health supervisors are offered a variety of different options depending on what their needs are in the playroom. They have a lot of choices in that throughout the year. Most of our trainings are virtual. Our basics and our supervision training is in person. This year we did it in Rochester because we had a lot of people just in the local area who received funding. But if we have a lot of people at different parts of the state, we may do a training downstate as well. And the cost of coming to training is also rolled into your grant as well. We ask also that you commit to consultation. So the Primary Project team will meet with you several times a year to make sure, especially in your first year, to make sure that you are implementing the program with fidelity, answer your questions, really just be there as like your cheerleader and your support member to really get you up and running in those first couple of years. And then even after your grant award is over, we are here to continue providing that support. Although we find that a lot of teams, they're just able to keep rolling after those 3 years. And then the final commitment is that we ask that as part of the requirements for funding, that after your 3 years, every school that receives funding apply for something called national certification. So it's basically a process where we analyze your program and we celebrate all the amazing work that you're doing and ensure that you are implementing the program with fidelity. And then once we have confirmed that, you get a special award letter and you get celebrated on our website. So it's a nice way to kind of make sure that your program is able to continue after those 3 years. So in terms of the application process, so there are 3 phases to that. So the first is the screening application, which a few of you, I think, have actually already filled out. So the screening application is due by January 12th, 2024. It is a very brief application. It gives us just sort of the basic information of your eligibility so that we know whether or not you are able to meet the basic criteria for the grant. And then after we review those grant applications, we, for phase 2, invite folks that meet those qualifications onto interviews. So this is basically in place of a longer application process. We want to really, like, at the heart of Primary Project is just building relationships. And so we want to start building that relationship and really get to know your team. And ask you some deeper level questions about your tiered systems of support and how you plan to integrate Primary Project into your community. So instead of writing, long paragraphs or essays, you don't have to do any extra prep work for this. We really just want to get to know you and ask you those questions to see if you're a good fit for the grant. And then after phase 2, for those who move on to phase 3, there's a budget submission process where you will build your budget for the year, decide on how much money you plan to ask for in your grant. And then we usually make decisions about whether or not we are funding districts or schools by the end of May, early June. And one of the reasons why it takes that long is because our budget is contingent upon the New York State budget. And so we have to wait until all of that passes in order to then accept schools onto our last process, or phase of the process. I know many of you have received the application materials because you were able to sign up for this session today. But if you have not, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. So the first is you can just put this website into your browser. This is also, if you want to hold up your phone here, this is a QR code, so you can access the application that way. And then I will also resend the application out to anybody who registered for this, along with this recorded video. So that way, if you need to come back to it for any reason, you can do that. And then for questions, you can email Lynn, you can email me, you can email Shelly, Shelly, if you could give a wave, she's also on this call. You can also email CI Primary Project at children'sinstitute.net, and we can send out whoever is the best person to answer your question through that. So if you think of a question and it's beyond today, please don't hesitate to reach out before you submit your application. So Lynn, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. And I'm also going to stop the recording.